I swear, I didn't mean to peek on purpose. The normally shut window was open, and the curtains were enticingly swaying in the breeze. I found myself looking into the depths of the window. And there she was, a woman of incredible beauty like I'd never seen before. I couldn't look away. I was completely frozen. My name is Scott Thompson, a 32-year-old salesman. I work at a real estate agency in the sales department. I feel like it's more appropriate to say that I used to be in sales. Not to brag, but I was an excellent salesman. I've been awarded as the top seller at the company headquarters more than once. I think I became complacent, believing that I'd continue down the path of success. A month ago, my fall into the pit came unexpectedly. In the morning, my colleague suddenly fell ill and asked me to stand in for an afternoon property showing appointment he had. The one who fell ill was my peer, Bob Miller. Bob's flashy appearance was his trademark, and honestly, I couldn't like him. He had a tendency to pick on me for some reason. But Bob asked me for a favor humbly, so I thought I had no choice but to accept. The client for the property showing was a woman in her late 40s. I wanted to send a female colleague to accompany her, but everyone was booked. The woman wished to see a recently built high-rise condo. It was a big contract worth nearly $2 million. Because she was Bob's client, I had to be extremely careful in guiding her. The last thing I wanted was for Bob to complain about not closing the deal because of me. I meticulously guided her through each room. She seemed distant, as if she was not really listening to my explanations. Just when I thought this was a lost cause, she suddenly put her arms around my neck, freezing me in place. The woman seductively grinned at me. This was a bad situation. "Would you like to play a little?" she asked, making my back run cold. She rubbed her soft body against mine, and I couldn't move. I wanted to remove her forcefully, but she was a client. While trying to figure out how to peacefully resolve the situation, the door suddenly opened. The person who stormed in was my boss, the department manager. His face was bright red with anger. He forcefully separated the woman and me. "Scott, what the hell are you doing with my wife? I'll be reporting this to the top boss." He yelled at me one-sidedly, and I stood there, dumbfounded. Apparently, the woman was the manager's wife. There had been rumors that they were living apart. The wife who had seduced me chuckled, saying busted. A few hours later, I was called into the director's office. The manager had reported me for trying to seduce a client and act indecently. Although I wanted to correct several parts of his report, the atmosphere didn't allow for excuses. The manager, still red in the face, was fuming with rage, and the director was looking at me as if I was garbage. Apparently, the manager reported that I had won all my previous contracts through similar unethical means. As a result, I was reassigned to a branch office in a rural town. I was essentially demoted. When I went back to my desk to receive the reassignment notice, I found Bob grinning smugly. I realized then that I had been set up. But it was too late. I silently packed up my personal belongings and left the main office. Since my reassignment to the small town branch office, I've been so idle. I feel like I'm rotting. The town where I was transferred is near the sea, much like a small rural town, and there's hardly any work. Young people have moved to the cities, leading to an increase in the population. I remembered that at a previous meeting at headquarters, there had been a discussion on whether to shut down this branch. "Isn't it boring, Scott? This place is just so quiet." There were no customers at the branch, and there was nowhere to do business. Every day, I was playing with the necessary paperwork. The only good thing about being transferred to this branch was that my living space had become larger. They had me using a family-sized apartment instead of a cramped city condo. It might just be big for the sake of being big, but I liked that I had room to stretch out. The day after I mentioned to the branch manager that pets were allowed, I found a box of kittens meowing on my desk when I arrived at work. I had an idea of who might be responsible, but I thought it might be a pleasant distraction, so I decided to keep them. To my surprise, the next morning my desk was stocked with a cat bed, kitten food, and canned goods. I couldn't help but smile. My colleagues were secretly watching me. I began to think it was silly to keep a stern face all the time. Gradually, I got used to the laid-back atmosphere of the branch, my colleagues, in this town. That day was a Sunday. The branch was open, but I was off. Since I started keeping kittens, I can't smoke indoors. I made a smoking area on the balcony. As usual, I leaned against the railing of the balcony and lit a cigarette. I could see the sparkling sea across the roofs. It was so bright, I had to lower my gaze. Next to my apartment was a two-story building. The usually closed corner room's window was open, the curtains swaying in the wind. I realized it was my first weekend since coming to this town. I guess the person in the corner room also had the day off. It felt rude to stare too much. Just as I was about to turn my gaze back to the sea, my eyes were drawn to the corner room's window. A young woman was in the midst of getting changed behind the fluttering curtain. I knew I shouldn't look, but it was hard to look away. I dropped the ash from my cigarette onto the back of my hand and let out an ouch. She looked at me. The moment our eyes met, she glared at me with a crazy expression. While I was taken aback by that, the window was closed roughly. Normally, I'd expect a or something like that, but she just glared at me without letting out a single scream. I felt a sudden urge to laugh. I couldn't hold back and started laughing. The window flew open again. "Don't laugh, just you wait and see," she yelled at me, and the window was closed again. Immediately after, the sound of footsteps echoed running down the outside stairs of the apartment. "Wait, really? Is she coming here?" I rushed from the balcony towards the entrance. I heard the elevator arriving through the door. I could hear the footsteps approaching. I steeled myself and waited for the doorbell to ring. The footsteps stopped. "Come out, hey," she yelled as I opened the front door with resignation. Then, I froze for a moment. She had mistakenly rung the doorbell of the next room. We looked at each other, both letting out an eh. The next moment, the next door neighbor, a full-figured lady, opened the door saying, "Yes, yes." The Chihuahua suddenly darted out and barked at her. She snapped back to reality and profusely apologized for accidentally entering the wrong room, while the Chihuahua continued to bark at her. I also instinctively bowed my head and said, "I'm sorry." The lady retrieved the Chihuahua and closed the door. "Don't make that mistake again. It's bothersome," I said to her, who was standing frozen in the suddenly quiet hallway. She glared at me, looking relieved that the commotion was over. She then marched straight into my room. She walked to the center of the room, spun around, and sharply pointed at me. "You saw it, didn't you, my thing?" That irritated me a little. It was like an accident. "I didn't see anything. What are you talking about?" I tried to argue that I hadn't been looking. I just happened to see. "Huh? What did you see?" This. While saying that, she pulled at the collar of her t-shirt to reveal her chest. A glimpse of her blue underwear was visible. "Hey, stop that, it's showing." Not wanting to compound the situation, I hurriedly moved away from her. She continued to flaunt her chest and accuse me, as if chasing me. "You saw it." "I saw it, or rather, it was in sight. I'm sorry." but I swear I didn't intentionally. Before I could finish my sentence, a slap from her landed on my cheek. My first encounter with her was quite intense. "Hey Scott, let's go grab lunch. It's my treat." Around lunchtime on next day, branch manager proposed. I nodded while I applied a cooling pad that my boss had given me to my slapped cheek. The place he took me to was a small cafe near the coast. I had passed by it before, but never entered. Branch manager, who was seemingly irregular, ordered the usual lunch for two at the counter. "Sure, 2 lunches. Take a seat wherever you like." The person who responded from behind the counter was the very woman who had slapped me the day before. She widened her eyes even further when she saw me standing next to the branch manager. I raised my hand in a somewhat awkward greeting. "Hi." "What are you saying, you peeper?" A torrent of abuse made me flinch. Branch manager casually said, "Oh, you peeped," and laughed. Left with no ground to stand on, I could only shrink back. In the end, I sat next to my boss at the counter, receiving her glare as we had lunch. When branch manager asked her if something happened, she explained what had happened yesterday. Not wanting to prolong the situation, I silently listened to their conversation. She complained about me to the branch manager. I was worried about how he would react, but he just seemed to find the whole thing amusing. He's a womanizer, no need for him to peep. I was shocked at branch manager's words. "What do you mean?" she asked eagerly. Branch manager started laughing as he told her why I was transferred. She burst into laughter, saying seriously, I was surprised by her reaction. I thought she would assume the worst of me and despise me, but she laughed and said, "You had some bad luck, huh?" As we were chatting excitedly at the counter, the cafe door opened, and in came men who were clearly not locals. She furrowed her brows by the sight of them. The manager was having a conversation with those men. They didn't seem to have come to the cafe to enjoy coffee. The manager received some documents and then sent the men away. Immediately, the manager threw the documents into the trash bin. "Hey, what was that all about?" I decided to ask her. "They've started coming around recently," she replied. "Apparently, they are real estate agents who have been aggressively buying a property in this area. Of course, they have nothing to do with our company." The company name she mentioned is indeed not well regarded in the industry. It seems they're asking if we're willing to sell this place too, she said with a sigh. Land speculation has a bad reputation, but it's part of the real estate business. There's nothing wrong with it if transactions are made at a fair price and with mutual consent. If you could sell at a high price, wouldn't it be okay to relocate somewhere else? I suggested. As a business, this place seemed somewhat lonely. Even at lunchtime, there were only us as customers. I thought that relocating and finding a more profitable location could be an option. But she reacted angrily and raised her eyebrows. "Don't make reckless comments without understanding the value of this community. If you call yourself a local real estate agent, then understand more about this community." She lashed out and then disappeared into the back room. "I'm sorry about that. She's really passionate about our local community. She is called Kathy. Don't take it too hard, alright? Keep on hanging out with us." He quietly served us another round of coffee. From that day, I established a new habit. Instead of going straight home from work, I decided to take a slow walk around the neighborhood. Kathy's words about the local love had been a stimulus. I had been downhearted since my demotion, but her words became a source of motivation. When I took the time to walk, I discovered many new things. While it was said that there weren't many young people, I noticed that there were many young newcomers. Most of them seemed to have migrated here, attracted by the ocean. I'm not a morning person and had never seen the morning sea. I was invited to the beach before going to work by a young man who had moved from the city and opened a pub. There was a local beach that I had not known. At the time when the sun was about to rise, there were people waiting for the waves on their surfboards. I had never surfed, so I was surprised to see people surfing so early in the morning. With my heart pounding, I went down to the sandy beach to watch the scene. While observing them, I noticed that there were proper rules. Only one person could ride a wave at a time. There seemed to be some priority order, and they were giving way to each other. It was surprising. I had imagined it to be a more rough sport, but it wasn't. "What are you doing?" I turned around by the voice, and it was Kathy. In her hands, she had a large beadboard and flippers. "Good morning, what's that?" I pointed at the large beadboard and asked. Kathy put her flippers on the sand and sat down next to me. Then she showed me the large beadboard. Unlike a normal beadboard, it had some kind of rope attached. At the end of the rope, there was something like a wristband. "It's a bodyboard. Haven't you seen one before?" She was dressed in a short-sleeved, three-quarter-length sweatsuit. Probably she is about to hit the waves. I learned that bodyboarding is a sport different from surfing. You ride the waves by laying your upper body on the board. You wear flippers on your feet, also known as fins, to help you navigate in the water. Everything was so new, and I had many questions. She explained it all patiently while doing her warm-up stretches. I learned that the waves are better in the morning, and that there are specific times when the waves appear and disappear. Why not give it a try, Scott? It's a waste not to. Living so close to the sea, make the best of your move. She teased as she put on her fins and stood up. She connected a leash, a cord that attaches the board to her wrist, and she was ready to go. With her fins on, she started walking backward into the sea, keeping her gaze on me. She looked sort of cute, like a penguin. Our eyes met and she gave me a big, joyful wave. When the water reached her waist, she turned around and started moving over the waves toward the horizon. I feared she might flip over when a big wave came, but she knew what she was doing. She built up some speed and dove under the wave with her board. I later found out this move is called a dolphin dive. She passed a few waves before reaching the waiting point where the best waves roll in. She sat on her board, waving at me. When a wave came, she'd speed up and ride it. She looked like she was flying as she slid down the large waves diagonally. After almost an hour in the water, she returned to the shore with a satisfied look on her face. The other surfers were also making their way back to land. Much to my surprise, they greeted me as each one passed by me. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel warm inside. Some of them had tattoos peeking out from under their wetsuits. Despite the variety, everyone was so friendly it was almost surprising. Cassie too had taken off the upper part of her wetsuit. Her vivid blue bikini gave me a small startle, but the next moment I realized something and I couldn't help but voice it out loud. "Ah, you were wearing a swimsuit that time, weren't you? It wasn't underwear after all." The underwear I thought I saw her in was actually her swimsuit. No wonder she didn't mind my seeing it. Kathy snorted with laughter. I felt a bit like I'd lost somehow, but I also felt surprisingly refreshed. This is a nice town. As I said this, squinting at the glittering sea, she gave me a happy smile and extended a welcoming hand. "Welcome." Her hand was still slightly cool from the water as I shook it. From that day on, I started waking up early to go to the beach. I would have loved to try surfing, but sadly, I can't swim. I was told that I'd float if I wore a wetsuit, but the idea of going into the sea was still a bit scary. I also started going to the cafe where Kathy works for lunch every day. I got to know the local shopkeepers, and I started hanging out more often with the young people who had moved here. As I started to blend into the local scene, I started hearing more and more about the land sharks. They seemed to be pushing their agenda quite aggressively. It felt like something big was in motion, and it didn't feel right. Then, one day, my hunch proved right. On my way to work, a black luxury car sped past me. I caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the window. It was Bob, the man who had set me up. I hadn't heard anything about Bob quitting his job. He's up to something with another real estate agency, doing things his own way. It's bound to be some shady business if he's moving in secret. I contacted a friend at the main office as soon as I got to work. According to my friend, Bob is apparently on annual leave today. Recently, he's been having a lot of unexplained absences, and his lifestyle has noticeably become more extravagant. I ask about his sales performance. Right now, in my absence, it seems that Bob is the top in sales. But my friend says there's something fishy about his sales. He suspects Bob might be making deals with some dangerous parties. Maybe that's the source of his flashy lifestyle. During lunch, I dropped by the usual cafe, expecting to see Kathy. As soon as I entered the cafe, I let out a "oh." The department manager's wife, the one who caused my demotion, was elegantly sipping coffee at the counter. She noticed me frozen at the entrance and gave me a soft smile. With a silent gesture from her beige manicured finger, she indicated for me to sit next to her. Reluctantly, I sat down next to her. "Why are you here? It was your fault that..." Once I verbalized it, I felt a surge of forgotten anger. She raised a finger to my lips as I was about to raise my voice and said, "Be quiet. I'm sorry about that time. I lost to the terms of exchange. I didn't mean to ruin your career." Her apologetic smile cools my rising anger. Somehow, I can't bring myself to dislike this woman, and it troubles me. I look down without being able to say anything, and she starts telling me the whole truth. It seems that Bob reached out to her when she was desperate to get a divorce. He offered her money to frame me. She agreed because she needed the money for her life after the divorce. Bob had been terribly bad-mouthing me, saying I was a hindrance to his future work. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Because the money hasn't been transferred. It means the contract is void, right?" It made sense. Moreover, she apparently investigated Bob out of spite. She spread out his investigation report in front of me. I quickly read through the report. It appeared that Bob had connections with some dangerous people. He seemed to be assisting them in contracting real estate properties. I realized that the one hunting all the local real estate was planning to establish a dedicated real estate company. I couldn't help but admire the scale of the plan. However, I couldn't accept the idea of this area being dominated by these dangerous parties, as per Bob's plan. "How much will you pay for this?" She tilted her head and peeked into my face. Her long eyelashes sparkled with a bit of glitter. I had no idea how much to offer. "How much do you think?" Timidly I asked her, and she replied with a small smile. "How about you treat me to a cup of coffee?" In front of my stunned eyes, she raised her empty coffee cup and said so. In the evening, I was alone in the office, thoroughly examining the investigation report on Bob I had received from her. I wrote a report to the headquarters within the night and sent it by email. The headquarters would surely be in turmoil by tomorrow morning. Relations with dangerous people would seriously harm the company's reputation. As I expected, I received a call from the headquarters, and the next day, I was asked to go to the headquarters. I found myself looking up at the headquarters building after a long time. I thought I might feel more nostalgic, but no such emotion arose. All I could think was the sky seems narrower here. As soon as I used my employee ID to enter the building, someone rushed towards me. It was the department manager who orchestrated my transfer. The department manager grabbed me by the collar and gruffly asked, "What are you doing here?" I may have been transferred to a branch office, but I'm still an employee of this company. I have business at headquarters. In the lobby, the manager and I glared at each other for a moment. The president's secretary interrupted us. I was instructed to go to the president's office immediately, and I shook off the department manager. The department manager was told to come along as well. Upon entering the president's office, I saw Bob standing there with a pale face. The department manager looked uneasy and sure of what's going on. The president said to me, "I read your report." On the desk were not only my report, but also a large number of documents and photos. They must have investigated this yesterday. These were likely proof of Bob's misconduct. The manager turned pale as looking at the photos of Bob conducting business meetings with disreputable individuals. A subordinate's misconduct reflected poorly on his superior's lack of oversight. I was hoping they'd both get kicked out due to collective responsibility. The verdict handed down by the president was that Bob was fired and the department manager was demoted. I later learned that most of Bob's sales were contracts with shady partners. We should be able to cancel the purchase contracts according to our internal regulations, but it will be a difficult task to negotiate each one individually. I can only hope that everyone at headquarters will pull together and work hard. Bob, having received his termination notice, left the room with a pale face. The president said to me, "Come back to the headquarters." He wanted me to perform as I used to, as the top salesman. That's the future I originally hoped for, but I felt a sense of unease. I stayed silent, unable to give an immediate answer. The president seemed to be waiting for my reply. My eyes were drawn to the large window behind the president. It was a sunny day and the sunlight was pouring in. But still, when I returned to the branch office, the sun had set and it was well past business hours. I figured everyone must have gone home by now, but the office windows were brightly lit. I was surprised to see people working overtime, which was unusual. As I opened the door, a party popper went off unexpectedly. The popping sound startled me, and I shrieked back. As I stood there, covered in thin paper strips, I was at a loss for words. "Congratulations on your return to the headquarters, back on the fast track." The office was filled with my branch colleagues, the branch manager, the president of the shopping district, and some surfers I know. When I said you'd probably be returning to the headquarters, everyone came. "You're really loved, huh?" said the branch manager, wearing a party hat. Some people were already teary-eyed at his words. It's taken for granted that I'm leaving this branch. I heard you used to be the top salesman. I had no idea. You're not someone who should be wasting away in a place like this, said Kathy with a slightly sad smile, causing a pang in my chest. You know, I turned down the offer to return to the headquarters. At my words, everyone made a bewildered face. Seeing their expressions, I felt somewhat guilty. I felt like I've let them down. Why? What about your promotion? Kathy, as if representing the whole group, bombarded me with questions. After a brief thought, I just repeated what I had told the president. The city's too cramped, it's suffocating, and there's no sea. I want to learn to swim. With a look of disbelief, Kathy hugged me. I whispered something only Kathy could hear. And you wouldn't be there. There was no reply from Kathy, but I knew what she was feeling from the tight grip on my arm. I thought my decision was not wrong at all. Early next morning, I stared at the sea from the sandy beach as usual. Next to me, Kathy was preparing to go into the sea. She narrowed her eyes, checking the waves. And as I watched her profile, Kathy glanced at me. "Weren't you the one who wanted to learn to swim?" She seemed unsatisfied that I wasn't going in with her. I wanted to learn to swim, but I didn't even have a swimsuit. When I told her I need to get the gear first, Kathy chuckled, "Just swim in your shorts." "I've been thinking, do you want to get married?" Kathy froze at my words. Ever since I met her, she's always been full of surprises. But this time, I wanted to surprise her, and I succeeded. I smiled to myself, looking at frozen Kathy. Coming back to her senses, she gave a chuckle looking at my grin, and clicked her tongue. "I'm not marrying a non-swimmer." She turned her head away and declared loudly. Then, in a much smaller voice, she added, "If you learn to swim, I'll consider it." Her teasing wasn't something new. "And when did you start liking me?" Before I could finish my line, I was hit with a bodyboard. "Stop getting ahead of yourself. Go back to HQ." After seeing my, with that parting shot, Kathy ran towards the sea. She went up to the water's edge, then turned back. She must have realized she'd forgotten her flippers. When I held them out, she snatched them away. And as she put on the flippers at the water's edge, she turned and gave me a big wave. The ring better be a diamond, not a birthstone. At Kathy's words, I made a big circle with both my hands. With her, I could even get into the sea without fear. I wish I could tell the dejected me from when I first arrived in this town, being transferred from the HQ. "You're going to find the greatest treasure in this town." For now, I guess I should thank Goddess of Fate.